You pay $20 per pound of acorn flour at Whole Foods. Medieval European households processed unlimited amounts for free, not as survival food, but as standard practice. They didn't abandon it because they found something better. They abandoned it because industrial agriculture made you forget it existed. 18 out of 20 ceramic vessels excavated from northern European settlements contain acorn starch granules embedded in the pottery itself, not occasional use, dedicated processing equipment used year-round. Iron Age storage sites across Europe reveal granaries filled with acorns stored alongside wheat and barley, not instead of grain, but planned alongside it as winter reserves. Archaeological teams at the University of Göttingen found storage pits holding over 300 pounds of acorns, carefully separated by species. This wasn't backup food, this was infrastructure. There's a preservation method that kept acorns shelf-stable for 3 years without refrigeration, a nutritional profile that beats modern wheat on fat content, protein quality, and sustained energy. Oak trees produce more usable calories per acre than most grain fields when you account for zero cultivation costs. Medieval peasants had free access to what modern health stores now market as a premium superfood. We erased all of it in 3 generations. You've been told acorns were famine food, eaten only when grain crops failed and people faced starvation. But notice what archaeologists actually found when they analyzed medieval storage facilities. Iron Age granaries contain acorns stored in massive quantities alongside cultivated grains, not hidden in corners, not marked as emergency reserves, stored in dedicated bins with the same care given to wheat and barley. The ceramic evidence is even more revealing. Processing vessels show continuous use across decades, with wear patterns identical to grain milling equipment. Analysis of medieval cooking pots from rural England shows acorn residue in 73% of examined vessels. This wasn't desperation, this was the foundation of the food system. Ancient Greek dietary records include acorns as routine food, mentioned alongside bread and olives. Roman agricultural texts reference acorn flour so frequently that modern historians initially assumed it was a translation error, until the archaeological evidence proved otherwise. The timeline is undeniable. Humans processed acorns as staple food for over 7,000 years before industrial agriculture even existed. Medieval chronicles record a specific disaster category that destroys the entire famine food narrative. They called it forest famine. This wasn't describing people forced to eat acorns when grain crops failed. This was the specific catastrophe when acorn harvests collapsed, revealing that communities expected this food source as a planned pillar of survival, not a desperate fallback. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1322 killed an estimated 4 million people across Europe. Modern history tells you it was a grain crisis. Medieval records tell a different story. Both grain and acorn harvests failed simultaneously for 3 consecutive years. That's why the death toll was apocalyptic. Communities lost 2 parallel food systems at once, not just their cultivated fields, but their wild forests. Drop a comment right now if you've ever walked past an oak tree and seen it as a food source, because your great-great-grandparents absolutely did. Here's what medieval households actually stocked in their pantries: rye, barley, spelt, salted fish, cured game, dried pulses like beans and lentils, preserved vegetables in brine, and an entire separate category: forest harvest. Acorns, chestnuts, hazelnuts, beech nuts. Renewable, abundant, requiring zero cultivation. You plant wheat and pray the weather cooperates. You plant barley and hope disease doesn't destroy your fields. You depend on oxen that can die from plague. Oak trees produce regardless of field conditions, labor availability, or seasonal disasters. No plowing, no seeding, no weeding, no irrigation, just collection. A single mature oak produces up to 2,000 pounds of acorns in a good mast year, enough to sustain a family for months. This wasn't poverty food. This was strategic risk management that modern industrial monoculture completely abandoned. Your food system depends on wheat, corn, rice, and soybeans. 4 crops feeding 8 billion people. One supply chain disruption creates grocery store shortages within 72 hours. Medieval food systems required multiple simultaneous catastrophic failures to create famine. The Great Famine happened because grain crops, acorn harvests, and livestock populations all collapsed together in the same 3-year window. Screenshot this because the timeline exposes everything. 7,000 years of acorn consumption across every major civilization. 150 years of industrial monoculture. We call the older system primitive. You walk past oak trees daily and see landscape decoration. Medieval Europeans saw calorie-dense, shelf-stable nutrition that didn't require land ownership, field labor, or favorable weather. That cognitive erasure happened in just 3 generations. Your great-great-grandparents recognized oak trees as legitimate food sources. You see yard waste requiring municipal removal. Hit like if you're starting to see oak trees differently, because what comes next changes everything. But knowing acorns were staple food doesn't explain how medieval people made them safe to eat. Raw acorns cause severe digestive distress and can be toxic in large quantities. The processing method they developed reveals food preservation science that modern researchers are only now validating, and it required 0 laboratory equipment, no written instructions, and worked flawlessly for millennia. The disappearance of acorns from our diet wasn't about discovering better food, it was about forgetting better chemistry. That's next. You think food preservation started with Louis Pasteur and refrigeration. Medieval peasants kept acorns edible for 3 years without either. They weren't guessing, they were practicing applied chemistry you were never taught in school. Raw acorns will make you violently ill within hours, not because they're poisonous like hemlock, because they contain tannins that your digestive system can't break down. Eat them straight from the tree and you'll experience severe stomach cramping, vomiting, kidney stress, and complete nutrient blockage. Your body recognizes them as food. The tannins inside prevent you from accessing a single calorie. Medieval foragers didn't have mass spectrometers to test tannin levels. They had observation, repetition, and 7,000 years of accumulated knowledge passed down from parent to child. What they developed wasn't primitive guesswork, it was systematic processing science with predictable, repeatable results. Here's what they knew that you don't. 2 major oak species, 2 completely different processing strategies. Red oak acorns contain extreme tannin concentrations, requiring 5 to 7 days of treatment before they're safe. White oak acorns contain significantly lower levels, sometimes edible with minimal processing. Medieval foragers could identify which species they were harvesting from 100 yards away by leaf shape, bark texture, and acorn cap patterns. Botanical expertise that would put modern grocery shoppers to shame. You've been taught that preservation means killing bacteria with heat or chemicals, but notice what medieval households discovered about whole acorns still in their shells. Stored dry and cool in cellars or attics, they remain perfectly shelf-stable for 2 to 3 years minimum. The reason destroys everything modern food science teaches about spoilage. Those same tannins that make raw acorns toxic also make them powerfully antimicrobial, natural chemical warfare against mold, bacteria, and fungal growth. Nature's preservative built into the nut itself. Compare that to grain storage. Wheat and barley require constant monitoring against weevils, moisture accumulation, and fungal contamination. One bad batch can destroy an entire winter's supply. Acorns sit dormant in their shells, chemically defended until you decide to process them. This gave medieval households flexible food security that grain storage could never match. Drop a comment if you've ever looked at an acorn and thought, that's edible for 3 years, because every medieval child knew it by age 5. Before processing, they ran quality control that modern food scientists now teach in university courses. Drop harvested acorns into a bucket of water. Good nuts sink immediately, damaged nuts float to the surface. Simple physics. Weevil-infested or internally rotted acorns have air pockets where solid nut meat should be. This single step, known as the float test, prevented wasted processing time on compromised nuts, medieval efficiency masquerading as grandma's folk wisdom. The processing methods reveal sophisticated understanding of temperature, time, and chemistry. Cold water leaching takes 5 to 7 days. Change the water 2 to 3 times daily, maintaining cool temperatures throughout. This preserves the natural oils and keeps starches in their raw state. The result, flour that thickens dramatically when heated, creating valuable texture for porridges, gravies, and baked goods. Hot water leaching takes 3 to 4 hours. Boil the shelled acorns in multiple water changes until the bitterness disappears. Faster and more convenient, but it cooks the starches and drives off beneficial oils. The result, sweeter flavor, softer texture, but reduced nutritional density and less culinary versatility. Here's the critical rule that proves medieval peasants understood the underlying chemistry. Never alternate between hot and cold water during processing. Temperature shifts trigger chemical reactions that permanently bind tannins deep into the nut's cellular structure. The batch becomes irreversibly bitter and unusable, hours of labor completely wasted. Choose one method, commit to it completely, never deviate. This isn't superstition or tradition. This is practical chemistry refined through thousands of generations of direct observation. Medieval peasants discovered something that cut processing time nearly in half. Adding wood ash to boiling water removed tannins dramatically faster than plain water alone. The chemistry is elegant. Wood ash is alkaline, tannins are acidic. The alkaline neutralizes the acid and transforms tannins into water-soluble compounds that flush away in fewer cycles. What normally required 6 complete water changes could be accomplished in 3 or 4 with wood ash. Here's what makes this even more remarkable. Native American communities across North America, including the Miwok, Pomo, and Menominee tribes documented by ethnographers in the early 1900s, independently developed the exact same wood ash technique. Convergent evolution of food science across completely separate cultures on different continents. This wasn't accident or lucky guess. This was reproducible scientific method applied without laboratories. Contemporary food scientists at UC Davis now confirm properly cold-leached acorn flour retains more beneficial omega-3 fatty acids, resistant starches, and antioxidant compounds than heavily processed modern grain flours. The medieval method wasn't primitive, it was sophisticated preservation science that maximized nutrition retention without industrial equipment. But preservation technique alone doesn't explain why acorns were worth the substantial effort required to process. The nutritional profile tells the rest of the story, and it contradicts everything you think you know about medieval peasant diets.
Drop a comment. When was the last time you looked at an oak tree and consciously recognized it as a food source? Could we bring acorns back into modern diets as a significant food source? Technically, yes. The processing methods still work perfectly. The trees still produce abundantly. The nutrition is objectively superior. Economically, no. The labor-to-calorie cost ratio makes zero financial sense when industrialized alternatives exist at lower prices. But understanding what our ancestors knew and what we consciously traded away for convenience fundamentally changes how we see both past and present. The Great Famine finally ended in 1322 after 7 consecutive years of agricultural collapse. An estimated 4 million people died across Europe. Many millions more survived specifically because they retained the knowledge of how to process acorns, chestnuts, and other forest foods that industrial populations have completely forgotten. Modern supply chain disruptions, and they're coming more frequently, would find us utterly helpless. We've systematically erased what medieval peasants considered absolutely basic survival knowledge that every child learned before age 10. Every single oak tree dropping thousands of acorns each autumn is a living reminder. Abundance and knowledge are not the same thing. We have unprecedented abundance. We've lost the knowledge of how to access it without industrial supply chains.
gently now.
Medieval peasants saw acorns as essential insurance against total dependence on grain harvests and landlord control of food supplies. You see them as yard waste, requiring paid removal services. One of these perspectives understood food security. The other one is you. Which era is really living in ignorance?